Projecting out rookie snaps and the rest of your questions on Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Shout out to my hashtag everydayers. Sound off if you can. You can find Locked On Vikings anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, including YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. If you have those, you can just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off of your first month. It is Twitter Tuesday. That means I'm answering your questions, so you can send them to me whenever you have them. At Luke Braun NFL or at Locked On Vikings on Twitter. You can also send an email to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or fill out the Google form in the show notes if you have something longer, or just leave a YouTube comment and I'll find it eventually. The first one I'm going to answer today comes from Get Quackin', who says, "Are you prepared for the next 3 months of Kirk discourse?" No, I'm not, because it's the same every time. It's nothing. We have no new information. Nothing has changed. Whatever you thought about Kirk Cousins, the last time we got new information about this was in the playoff game. So I don't know, whatever you thought then, or after you calmed down from the immediate aftermath of the playoff game. But okay, there's a bunch of actual quarterback questions here that I guess are worth answering. The next one comes from Simon, who says, "If we have a season where we end up with a pick in the 12 to 18 range, do you think Kwesi will try and make a trade like the Panthers for the top pick? And if so, how much more is a premium guy like Caleb Williams to trade up for?" So this is hard to answer without knowing how these dudes play their senior year. I always think of like Spencer Rattler, who was like this really supposed to be top pick, number one overall guy, and then he has like a really bad season, and suddenly he's not a guy you have to trade up for at all, right? There are some prospects that transcend all of this, like Trevor Lawrence probably could have entered the NFL out of high school, but for the most part, we don't. It's like really hard to answer that question with the depth of this upcoming QB class and which guy is going to rise to the top, which guy is going to have a bad senior year and suddenly become a 5th round pick. But what I guess I'll say right now. And this also speaks to the next question, which comes from Vikes fan 33, who says, "For those of us that desperately wanted a high potential young QB of the future this past draft and want to move on from Kirk, where's the light at the end of the tunnel?" Here's what I'll say. The Vikings are open to keeping Kirk Cousins, but they aren't committed to it at all. And dude's 35, like clock's ticking. Even if you are the staunchest of Kirk stands, you got to understand, like 2-3 years on this dude, and then age is going to start becoming a factor. So QB of the future is a need sooner than later. And the Vikings are well aware of this. They are not behaving like a team that's like they're not behaving like the Lions are with Jared Goff, right? The Lions are in extension talks with Jared Goff. They're like into Jared Goff. They want Jared Goff to be their guy. They think Jared Goff can win them a Super Bowl. I don't think the Vikings are at that level with Kirk Cousins. And so however they get their QB of the future, what they're not going to do is just kick Kirk Cousins to the curb and then like suck till they get a QB. That's how your roster gets ground into a nub. But next draft, yeah, I think they try again. Whether they put another year on Kirk's contract just to make sure they have a bridge for if the QB needs a year, that's kind of a separate question. It's more of a question of methodology of how to foster your new QB of the future, not whether to get a QB of the future. I could see that kind of thing happening. But I think if they have a middling season, and it's interesting because the worse the Vikings do, the easier it will be to get a quarterback and the easier it will be to replace Kirk Cousins. The better Kirk Cousins does, the harder he makes it to replace himself, But if they're in the 12 to 18 range and there is an opportunity to trade up with the number one team, let's say that team is like the Cardinals or something like that, which the next question is, then I think that could be in the cards. Yeah, absolutely. They'll try to do it. They tried pretty hard to get up to 3 for a QB of the future. I think I would be hard pressed to figure out why they wouldn't be just as aggressive next year, assuming they like a guy as much as they liked Anthony Richardson this year. Maybe they don't like any of those quarterbacks, and then why would they trade up for one of those guys? Which would also be valid if they just like don't have that high a grade on those guys. But again, all of that sort of predicated on how all their final seasons in college go. Red and Purple asks, if the Cards end up with the first overall pick, would you be comfortable trading 2 firsts for Kyler? What would be your limit? So I'm not like that into Kyler anymore. I don't know. Something is brewing over there in Arizona that I don't like. I think he's an incredibly talented dude. It seems like there's like whatever drama is happening in Arizona, going back to like the homework clause and all the reports coming out of Arizona that one guy doesn't like the other and somebody doesn't like Kyler doesn't like some guy. Something about that I kind of just don't want to be a part of it, but I don't know. 2 firsts for Kyler. I think that's a pretty good deal anyways. Just I mean, look, he's a franchise quarterback that went first overall and is kind of, if you look at the Cardinals, like one of the things that's the least wrong about it. So that's probably still a pretty good deal. I guess I'd take it, but I don't know if that's necessarily the direction I would take this ship. If the Cardinals had the first overall pick and they were willing to sell the first overall pick, I would much rather take that under the assumption that like, they're going to keep Kyler Murray and they're into it. I mean, they have that gigantic contract on him too. That makes him kind of weird to trade him away. Not impossible or anything, but just like weird. So that's like a difficult thing for that too. Ken Levin asks, early season prediction. I feel like Ivan Pace will get the most snaps out of any rookies not named Addison, hot or cold with this take. I think that's a scorcher. I respect it, but that's a scorcher. Mekhi Blackman, Jaquelin Roy, Jay Ward, they'll all get in, I think. Ivan Pace, look, man, he didn't get drafted. He's got to make the team first. And I guess the same is true. Like Jaquelin Roy's a 5th round pick. So I guess that's true for him. Jay Ward is a 4th round pick, a little bit harder for a 4th round pick to not make the team. You kind of have to be Willie Beavers bad for that, which is a special kind of bad. But I mean, like Mekhi Blackman, unless he full on red shirts, which could happen, right? Some guys are just not ready to play. But I think those guys will get in some capacity. Ivan Pace is going to have a much harder time getting in because Brian Asamoah and Jordan Hicks aren't like, that's not a rotational role as much as corner will be. I think corner will be a like drive to drive, different guys in depending on the matchup. This game, one guy will get more run. That game, another guy will get more run. So I think it'll be a little bit harder for like a linebacker to get in from scrimmage. If we're counting special teams snaps, like you'd have to get to a world where like all the rookies redshirt, but Ivan Pace who gets special team snap for this to like hit. So I think that's a scorching take. Or I don't know, maybe he beats Jordan Hicks out for the job and we cut Jordan Hicks after the second preseason game and everybody's shocked about it. Like stranger things have certainly happened in the preseason. AJ Gamer says, is it just me or is secondary even more of a question mark than last season? Gosh, yeah, kinda. Because last year we had Dantzler, who had a strong camp, and maybe he's going to be good. Ended up benched by the end of the year for Duke Shelley. We had Patrick Peterson in the building. Okay, we can pencil that in. Well, we got Byron Murphy. Okay, we can pencil that in. We're probably going to have some rookie or some second-year guy that has a strong camp. We'll see how he does well. So probably the same, but yeah, there's still, we had Chandon Sullivan in the building, right? And as much as I didn't like the Chandon Sullivan signing, it was very clear who was going to be he is the nickel corner. Okay. Not so much here. It's all competition and snap rotations and stuff. And it's hard to figure that out in a Brian Flores, Patriots, Belichick style defense. It's kind of hard to figure out who's going to be the starter at cornerback because it is all like everybody has their role and everybody gets a piece. So it's a little bit muddier. It's not like here's CB1, here's CB2, here's CB3. It's like, well, you're kind of the taller guy and you're the faster guy and you're this guy and you're better in these situations. And everybody kind of has their role. And it's a lot more about like finding specialized things and, finding the game plan where, all right, this offense really dies when you have a cornerback that's good at this and having like as many answers to that question as possible. So I would agree that it's more of a question mark. And a safety room's kind of the same, but it's also built in a way that's just gonna be a little bit more difficult to read. I have a bunch more questions. I want to make sure I get to all of them. But before I do that, a quick word from the sponsor of today's episode, which is BetterHelp. BetterHelp is therapy online made easy. Therapy, especially for dudes, all right, talking to the fellas for the most part here, it can be an intimidating thing for us because it has this stigma of something you only do when you're in a crisis or you need, some emergency help, or there's some problem that we as men, we can't solve it on our own and we need help, and it's not manly. But it's not what therapy is. Therapy is maintenance. It's getting your oil changed. It's going to the gym, but for your mental health. And I think it's really important to sort of destigmatize that. It's not like a failure of your own sensibilities or your own like mental fortitude to go to therapy. I think it's just good for you, just a healthy habit. And BetterHelp can help you get set up by giving you a lot of different options of therapists to switch between. If you don't like one, you can go try a different one. That's really important. A lot of people will try one therapist, have a terrible experience, and assume all therapy is like that. And that's not really the case. Try a bunch of people, set up a bunch of consults until you find someone that you really jive with. It's also entirely online, so it's convenient, it's flexible. If you'd want to do a video call, if you want to just do a phone call, whatever you're comfortable with, there's a way to set that up. So find more balance with BetterHelp. You can visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Another shout out to my hashtag everydayers. You can check out my Patreon page for a couple of film breakdowns on rookies. I'm working on I want to get every draft pick. Since there's 6 of them, I should be able to do that, but I'm going to kind of take my time on this. So appreciate your patience there. But in the meantime, you can check out the history doc if you haven't already. 7-part series detailing the history of the Minnesota Vikings. Let's move on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag. The next question comes from Skull, and then a bunch of numbers, who says, on defense, it looks like there will be quite the competition for playing time, especially in the DB room. How much do you think competition between young guys with a chip on their shoulder impacts how well they play? I don't think that that's the way to frame it. I hear what you're asking, but the value of competition is not in not as like a motivational tactic necessarily. Like, these guys are NFL players. They did not get here without being pretty motivated. You don't get to this level without being pretty motivated, I guess. But it's more of a sort of like, think about it probabilistically, right? It gives you a whole bunch of different outcomes. Like, if you think about like player A versus player B in a competition, and there is let's keep the math simple, right? There's a 50-50 chance that player A is good and a 50-50 chance that player B is good. So if you think about what those outcomes could be, you've got an outcome where player A is good, but player B isn't. Okay, you've got a good player. The outcome where player B is good, but player A isn't. Okay, you've got a good player. The outcome where they're both good, all right, well, that's a great problem to have. And the outcome where they're both bad, okay, well, you were kind of screwed no matter what you did here. That is, I guess, more the value of competition. The cream will rise. You get to kind of find out who is doing well, doing poorly, who's learning things, who's improved. And the thing is, you don't necessarily have a competition unless you need a competition, because you don't know who's good on your team. And this is kind of where they say, like, hey, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. Like, you look at like Commanders, they got like Sam Howell versus Jacoby Brissett. Nice competition. You don't have a quarterback, really. Because if you don't have someone you know is good and you need competition to figure out who is good, chances are that room is not exactly in the best of shape. But I will say this. With corner, I think it's going to be more of a market share snap count thing rather than, okay, here's your starters, here's your backups, like kind of rigidity Madden roster kind of way. So we'll see how it all plays out. But camp is a proving ground for what you already know, not like let's get a backup in there to really light a fire under him kind of thing. Like, these guys don't need that kind of motivation. It's just a way to sort of check on your evaluations, maybe. Dinesh Kalyana Sundar asks, with the current roster, how do you see our defense make improvements in Flores' new scheme? What positions are critical failure points and what positions are commodities? I guess corner is the major failure point here, right? In Brian Flores' defense, one of the most popular blitzes is cover zero. No safeties. When no seatbelts, we die like men, right? Or maybe just one safety. But in zero safety blitzes, cover zero blitzes, because there is no deep safety net, you have to align off. You cannot align press and blitz cover zero. Like, I guess you can, but that's deranged behavior. So corners in off man, how are those guys at playing that? It's been something I've been watching really closely in the draft and stuff, and I think that's like a critical failure point. If your corners cannot cover in off man, if they cannot break on a slant from a 10-yard alignment, for example, you will get toasted when you cover zero blitz. And if you can't cover zero blitz, like that's a whole bunch of play calls that Brian Flores is just playing right into, right? I think that's a really, really critical failure point. I think another critical failure point is up front, depending on the run front that they are in. And I don't have a great, I'm like still a little bit fuzzy on the run fits. That's one of my projects for this offseason, for this summer, is to get to know that a little bit better. But at least the way I understand it, there is a lot of emphasis placed on the big guys up front, the big run stuffer guys. And if they get washed out, if they can't hold their spot, if they can't hold their gap, that can be a really, really, really big failure point against the run. So those are two places that are pretty major in terms of like off-ball linebackers. If you're looking for something that you can kind of cover up a little bit easier, if those guys suck, send those guys on blitzes, right? Just, okay, here's your gap, point and shoot, go run. But it, it asks certain things of those guys in the run fit. So it's not like those guys are totally negligible or anything like that. It's just, if they've got, if they're not as good in coverage, you can just send them on a blitz more often. Deck with 2 C's says, can we please sign another veteran corner? I'm saying, man, I would love it, but I don't know. Cap wise, it doesn't seem like they've planned to. They can make more space if they have to, and we'll see what happens with Dalvin Cook and Smith and Hunter and all that stuff. So I exactly know where their cap will end up. They have a much better sense for where they expect the cap to end up. We just kind of have to wait and see what they're planning. But yeah, man, I would love that. I don't really have a great sense for who's out there though, but I don't know. Someone would be nice. So someone that like give Booth and Evans and Blackman somebody more established to beat. That's what I want. You're not going to get, starting quality CB2 in May, but give me somebody else for them to beat other than each other. Addison asks, what happens if Jaren Hall is ready for QB1? I don't see that happening, but okay. So let's go down this rabbit hole. So what is in the scenario where Jaren Hall is like, oh, whoa, this dude, wait a minute. We struck gold here. This dude's a starter. What probably happens is Kirk plays out the rest of his deal and walks. Jaren Hall goes in. We have a very bizarre offseason next year where we don't get a quarterback and everyone's like, wait, are they going with Jaren Hall? Like the way we're looking at the Commanders or the Bucks right now, like, wait, are they going with Kyle Trask? What's happening? And it'll look really weird. But then if he played well enough in camp or whatever to warrant all that decision, then he probably surprises us in 2024. And we have a very, very bizarre experience of like how that information comes to be revealed to us. And then I'll watch him play well in the preseason. I'll probably be banging his drum the whole time and then get vindicated. Sounds great. Let's do that, future. KFT asks, why didn't the Vikings draft or bring in free agent offensive guards or centers to challenge Ed Ingram or Ezra Cleveland during the offseason? Man, Ezra Cleveland's gotten like a weird hate train lately, and I didn't know, like, there was none of this over the season. He had some ups and downs over the season. He had a couple of games that were like really, really bad, but he had a couple games that were really, really good. And I think most everybody kind of accepted that like every year Ezra Cleveland has been here, he's taken like a marginal step forward. And he's just sort of slowly but steadily improving and becoming a better left guard. He's closer to getting like a long-term extension than he is to getting replaced. Like, I don't know where fans are getting this like hate train for Ezra Cleveland. He's closer to getting extended than he is to getting replaced. So I don't think that that's going to be the case. with Ed Ingram, I definitely get that. But again, they're not going to replace him. I think they see him as a future starter. And while he had his rookie struggles, I think they just are expecting him to develop through that. And if he doesn't, then we'll go get a replacement. But you don't. I think with guards, you give that a little more time. The competition that you really would think is, wait, they brought back Garrett Bradbury. They didn't have to do that, right? Ed Ingram, look, he's in his second year. You drafted him in the second round. You're going to give that dude another year. Ezra Cleveland, he's got that spot on lock. He's still under contract. Garrett Bradbury, you had to actively do something to bring him back. You can't just say, oh, we'll just kind of let that ride. No, you had to do it. And they got him back for a relatively cheap contract. So maybe this is just a cutting costs measure, but they also probably just liked him as a center, and they're not going to have a lot of serious competition. There's Austin Schlottmann's in the building. Chris Reed's in the building. Those guys will push all of these starters in a more formal sense than an actual sense. Yeah, it's of course everyone's competing. Yes, very much so, coach. Yeah. But I think the answer to that is they like those dudes more than you think they do, man. And you don't have to agree with them, but you got to understand that they don't agree with you, I got a few more questions here. And I want to make sure that I get to all of them. So let's keep it rolling with this Locked On Vikings Twitter Tuesday episode. The next one comes from Chowchich, who asks, top 3 Vikings games to watch or rewatch of all time. Started following the NFL in 2018, so old games are welcome. Okay, so if you started in 2018, I got to start you with the Miracle Game, right? That's the game for modern Vikings fans to go watch. And I'm not going to give you the 2009 NFC Championship or the Super Bowls or 98 or any of that. I'll spare you, all right? Those are all sad. I'm going to give you games that are a good time. So I'll give you that. I would say if you want to go really retro, go watch 1980, The Miracle at the Met. You can find the whole game on YouTube. You can find the whole Minneapolis Miracle game on YouTube as well in 2017, Vikings Saints playoffs. Those 2 games are an absolute blast and a half. God, keeping this to 3 is hard, but I do have a rule that I will only ever do top 3. So I think after that, Randy Moss 98 Thanksgiving game. Again, you can search that whole game out on YouTube. You get a little bit of John Madden, a little bit of that Randy Moss breakout. I must mention there's an honorable mention to, I believe it is 1974 divisional round against the Rams, the one where they had a kick return. That's a good one if you really want to get deep. And I don't know if you can actually find that entire game though on online anymore. It's tougher to get whole games when you get that far back, but you can have a CBS game of the week. It's 25-minute thing. So there you go. 3 and an honorable mention. Darn Many says, will Jordan Addison pass Devin Aromashodu on the all-time Vikings wideout list? So Devin, I looked this up. Devin Aromashodu had, 640 yards as a Viking. I would hope that Jordan Addison can cross that. With any luck, Jordan Addison crosses that in 1 year, and that becomes a more interesting, over under 640 yards in his rookie year, assuming health and all that. You could get injured and that could get ruined. You could just kind of not come on really until week 8 and that could get ruined, which is absolutely something that can happen to a player. Transitioning to the NFL is hard. Don't flip out if every rookie doesn't play week 1. People will. There's nothing we can do about it. But listeners, dear listener, #everydayers, all right, will know that if rookies don't get in right away, that's okay. Sometimes it just takes a minute. Took Justin Jefferson till week 8 to learn the playbook, and you don't have to take my word for it. That's a quote from Kirk Cousins. It happens, and it's okay. But all of that, he could still, he could get in week 5 and still cross 640. Arlie G13 says, what's the worst the Vikings can do and still bring back Kirk Cousins for another year? Yeah, this is why I brought that up before, because the worse Kirk Cousins does, not only does it become easier to replace him, assuming with draft position and stuff, but it also becomes, hey, it becomes more justifiable, right? So I would say the answer to this is if you make the playoffs with Kirk Cousins and you really make the playoffs, don't give me any of this, 7 seed, you snuck in, you got undressed by a real team. If you really make the playoffs and you feel like you're a less than a touchdown underdog in that game, that game is worth watching, then I think it becomes harder to justify moving on from, well, we made the playoffs twice in a row with him, that would be a pretty difficult argument. And also, you're drafting in the 20s or whatever, and it becomes harder to trade up. I think a lot of that depends on how many first round quarterbacks we feel there are. If it's another one like this last year where we feel like there's 4 guys that could be first round quarterbacks, turned out to only be 3. Will Levis barely slips out of the first. But that's also a factor. So but I think if you miss the playoffs, Kirk's out. I can't see a world where they go, 8-9 and they barely miss the playoffs and they go, well, we were only 1 game out, we'll keep Kirk Cousins. I don't think the Vikings are thinking that. I don't think Kwesi's thinking that way. Ben King Quayle asks, of the players who didn't get their 5th-year option, which player would you be most interested in trading for? Can't help but think of Chase Young or Patrick Queen being insanely nice moves. Chase Young is a weird one because he would be something of a reclamation project, and I wouldn't want to pay more than what you'd pay for a reclamation project, and I don't think the Commanders are looking to sell him for that price. I think Isaiah Simmons is kind of an interesting name, just a little bit, another reclamation project, but I think Arizona, they benched him. I think they are willing to kind of dump him off for day 3 compensation, and I'd be willing to do that. A fascinating one. I don't know what the deal is with Javon Kinlaw. He did not get his option exercised. That's a fascinating situation. And, I think the Vikings could use more disruptive DT up front. That is, I guess, what Javon Kinlaw was supposed to be coming out. I have not really tracked his career at all, though, so maybe I just said a player who sucks and I don't even know about it. Chris asks, would you rather have access to all of the communication involved? One more. Somebody said CJ Henderson. No, I didn't like him coming out. I didn't like him when he went 9th overall to the Jags. I didn't like him when he was on the trade block the first time. Hard pass. I know he's a corner, but at this point we've got enough worm bodies. We don't need to settle for guys with a pulse. Chris asks, would you rather have access to all of the communication involving a team's big board or all of the communication involving executing the draft? The latter for sure. Having access to all the communication about building the board, the positional weighting, the scouting and all that stuff would be interesting. Hanging out with a scout can be kind of fun. Just hearing their thoughts when they see a play, what they say about the play can be really interesting. But I think it's way juicier to be in the room going, okay, how did they negotiate that trade? What did they almost do? What are they sitting there watching their board going, okay, at what point do we trade up? All of those decisions are fascinating to me. In the high stress environment of a draft war room, I'm super into that. Last one comes from Kurt with 2 C's, who asks, how do you feel about Jordan Addison's let's get paid response on draft night? Are you mad that he would like to be paid for his services and make money? A lot of people are really mad about that. No, I think it's awesome. Heck yeah, let's get paid then. Go ahead and get paid. If Jordan Addison is getting paid, that likely means the Vikings made a good draft pick. So I am into that outcome. I think a lot of people don't want athletes to get paid because, look, there's we'll call them factors that I think influence this. But I think part of it is just this stigma. This is a playground game, right? They're playing an outdoor children's game, and they are entitled to millions of dollars for that? What do you mean about? And I think people get up in arms about that because they feel like it's not a real job. But to those people, I don't know. You must just hate capitalism, which I guess go for it. I'm not going to argue with you. But that's what it is, right? It's the value of the product is kind of rooted in how much money the product makes, right? Football is a major company that makes a lot of money. If you want to say that the value of the product is rooted in how much the people who create that product sacrifice, it's also pretty hard to argue against what football players sacrifice: their health, all of their time, time with their family. They experience soreness and injury and, sometimes debilitating injury for their entire lives afterwards. So, and it will shorten their lives. They're literally taking years off their life. It's not like they're not putting in any cost, my job, this is not going to take years off my life. This is cushy. Football, that's going to knock you out. So let's get paid is my answer to that. That is, it's a valuable job. People want to pay for it. It's really, really hard work. It takes like a heck of a work ethic to get here, like I mentioned before. And it is a product that makes a lot of money. Full stop. I don't know what else you want from it. Let's tomorrow talk about Jay Ward, I guess. I've got an interview with Caroline Fenton of Locked on LSU, do a little bit of story time, do a little bit of maybe a little bit of evaluation too. And we'll just keep on moving on. I will see you all for that. And as always, Skol.